What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about a movie that made me wish I got to moonlight as a fluffy animal during middle school, Turning Red. Pixar's newest entry explores all of the pressure and horrors of becoming a young adult through the story of a girl who turns into a giant red panda whenever she gets too emotional. Oddly relatable stuff. And while I'm pretty sure none of you have literally transformed into an ancestral panda during puberty, we've probably all had the experience of being an awkward and confused 13-year-old with a changing body and raging hormones. But is this movie about more than just that? Is its exploration of the dark side of emotional repression also a window into the broader world of psychosexual development? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition on Turning Red, Unleashing Your Panda. And spoilers ahead for Turning Red, which you can currently watch right now on Disney+, who isn't sponsoring this video, but hey, they want to pay, we're down. So what can an animated film about a girl who turns into a panda tell us about the psychology behind emotional repression? We'll get there, but first, let's meet our main character. Turning Red's about 13-year-old Mei Lee, nicknamed Mei Mei.
I've been doing my own thing, making my own moves, 24/7, 365.
Clearly, Mei's crushing it.
Oh, about that hustle, am I right?
She has a crew of best friends, excels scholastically, can play a rippin' flute solo, and seems to genuinely enjoy helping her mom manage the family temple. And in a key sign of early 2000s life, she's also deeply emotionally invested in a boy band. Much of what's happening in Mei's life fits pretty well with Sigmund Freud's description of the psychosexual development of children, which is basically the process where we go from disinterested in sex to horned up 24/7. According to this theory, around the ages of 7 through 12, children begin to assert their own independence and move beyond their childhood ego as they learn to love and care about others. And Mei seems to be on the precipice of all of this. In one early scene, her friends urge her to assert herself, cancel plans with her mom, and come do karaoke. Though Mei seems tempted, she resists, not wanting to let her mom down on cleaning day.
Please. Can't. It's cleaning day.
Hey, every day is cleaning day.
And for the most part, everything seems pretty chill. Until that night, when Mei's casual doodling turns into a pretty erotic picture of corner store hunk Devin. It's clear that Mei is expressing a type of unconscious lust or desire, which, based on her reaction, seems new for her. This suggests she might be entering the final phase of psychosexual development in Freud, the genital stage, which typically happens around 13. And this leads to a type of anxiety or shame that sends Mei under her bed, seemingly hiding from the watchful eyes of, say, God, or her mom. If you grew up religious and ended up accidentally inventing masturbation when you were 13, then you know what we mean. And this right here is the film's first clear example of repression. Mei tries to hide the drawings from her mother, seemingly fearing that she'll be judged for her fledgling desire. This, of course, is exactly what happens. Mei's mom compounds her daughter's shame and anxiety by showing the drawings to Devin and a bunch of Mei's classmates. The subsequent teasing only causes Mei more anxiety and shame. Freud can help us better understand what's happening here, particularly in regards to Mei's initial repression of her desires. Now, Freud first noticed repression when his patients struggled to recall past memories during analysis. He concluded that this had to do with an unconscious mechanism by which our human minds push down and hide, i.e. repress, shameful memories so we don't have to actively deal with them. That's probably why, for the life of me, I can barely remember anything that happened between the ages of 11 and 15. And I'm just gonna trust my unconscious and assume it's for good reasons. This led old Sigmund to develop a theory of repression that involves two stages. First, there's primal repression, in which a child realizes that acting on certain desires leads to anxiety and other unpleasant emotions. The child subsequently represses those desires. This eventually blossoms into repression proper, in which repression leads to the development of the superego. That's a sort of self-regulated internal law or conscience, often modeled on a parent or religious figure. This superego then bosses around our ego, which is the part of the mind we'd usually associate with our identity, and helps keep our innate impulses and desires at bay. These desires are what Freud calls our id, which is basically the four loko chugging frat boy part of your personality. In this case, Mei's id is expressing a sexual desire for Devin. But then this desire results in shame and other negative consequences. So her superego starts to create a moral structure under which this type of desire and behavior is bad and must be repressed.
This will never happen again.
and her poor ego now has to try to balance these two opposing forces. Of course, repression isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, if you have a strong unconscious desire to strip down your underwear, jump up on a conference table at your next work meeting while flinging lunch meat at your colleagues, it's a good thing you have a superego to say, nah bro, that's weird, don't do that. However, it's not good when a normal and healthy desire gets repressed. In fact, that can come with some serious side effects. It's like the unconscious version of what happens when the adults in the Footloose town forbid the teens from dancing. If you tell the kids they can't dance, they're just gonna want to dance more.
Hot, loaded like a gun.
And Mei realizes the side effects of her repression pretty quickly when she wakes up the next morning as a giant red panda. This transformation literalizes some of her fears and shame. Namely, that having normal teenage desires is turning her into a monster. And of course, the movie isn't not using this as an allegory for a young woman getting her first period, as Mei's mother's initial reaction is to get her ibuprofen and a shocking variety of pads. But the film uses the specificity of Mei's experience of transitioning into womanhood to make a much broader point about the role of repression. We learn early on that the panda is brought out by strong emotions. And it's not just negative emotions. Even a box full of adorable Pixar kittens threatens to unleash the beast. But this paints a clear message. Strong emotions of any kind are bad and should be kept inside where they can't cause any harm. Now, Mei learns that one of her ancestors asked to be turned into a red panda to defend her family while the men were away at war. Ever since, each woman in her lineage has developed a panda of their own. However, they've all gone through a religious ceremony to separate from their panda, trapping its essence in a piece of jewelry or other token. If Mei can just make it to the next red moon, she can exorcise that furry critter for good. But in the meantime, being forced to contain her panda just furthers Mei's established pattern of repression. Her experience of sexual desire led to shame and guilt, which caused the panda to emerge. And now to keep the panda at bay, she needs to repress any further desires and emotions, even positive ones, so that she can remain a model student without revealing her very furry family secret. Now, we already talked about the superego, that part of the unconscious that sets up all types of rules and regulations so that our scumbag id can't run rampant. And Mei, with the help of her family's mythology, takes on a new superego structure specifically designed to repress the hell out of that adorable panda.
Happy?
Oh yeah, that's the stuff.
But even with this family narrative, Mei slowly embraces her emotions and passions and starts turning panda whenever she feels like it. Though she's supposed to keep her panda at bay until the ritual, she realizes being a panda is, as you might expect, super fun, not to mention quite financially lucrative. And her best friends encourage it, noting that it's bringing out a whole new side of Mei that they really love.
You've really changed, and I'm proud of you. Just don't get rid of all of it.
However, in doing this, Mei's once Lorelai and Rory relationship with her mother begins to slowly fracture. And to understand this fracturing mother-daughter relationship, we need to kiss Freud goodbye, as he was notorious for framing psychological development around male sexuality. And that's led many subsequent theorists to worry that thinkers like Freud fail to adequately understand the particulars of female sexual development. This is exactly what Bulgarian-French theorist Julia Kristeva thought. Her own account of psychosexual development lands with the symbolic stage, i.e., when children enter the world of linguistic communication, social relations, the law, etc. During this phase, a child develops a sense of identity that is separate from the mother, and this process involves something called objection. Objection basically happens when we encounter a rupture, specifically the distinction between ourself and the other. This causes a breakdown in our sense of meaning. According to Kristeva, the abject confronts us with our earliest attempts to release the hold of maternal entity even before existing outside of her, thanks to the autonomy of language. It is a violent, clumsy breaking away, with the constant risk of falling back under the sway of a power as securing as it is stifling. Surprisingly, realizing that you are not one and the same as your mom can be pretty upsetting. A very gnarly example of this would be that seeing a corpse for the first time is a traumatic reminder that we too are a body made of material stuff that is one day going to die and decay. In a less gnarly but still gross example, this can also happen when we see an open wound, or fecal matter, as it reminds us that our own bodies are full of blood and shit. and we're basically animals, but also human, but still animal, which is super confusing. In particular, Kristeva associates this process with the maternal figure, and that horrifying moment in which we separate ourselves from our mother. Also important to note that Kristeva's account doesn't map on to the same age progression as Freud's, with much of this development taking place from birth through age 4, though it repeats throughout life. For Kristeva, experiencing the abject is a necessary part of the development process on the individual's way to language and a full self-consciousness. Or as Kristeva puts it, objection is a precondition of narcissism, with narcissism here being less about loving to look in the mirror and more about recognizing that there's a you to look at in the mirror in the first place. Now, Turning Red definitely hints at the idea that dropping your uterine lining can provide an abject experience, which can lead to distancing from the mother, even if she's not.
Lord visited me with a curse. The curse was the curse of blood.
That said, this is only hinted at and not explicitly explored in the movie, which is why we're more interested in the film's primary metaphor for the abject, which is, of course, the red panda. It puts Mei at the unstable boundary of the human and the animal. She wants to just be a normal human kid, but is haunted by this wild animal that exists within her. It's an identity crisis that Kristeva might have warned could lead to melancholia, depression, and even aggressive acting out, which we see in both Mei's initial reaction to becoming Panda and her near murder of her Nelly idolizing classmate, Tyler. So how do we deal with these abject experiences that send our fragile developing egos reeling? Kristeva says that both art and religion can serve the purpose of purifying the abject, i.e., they give us images and narratives that make gross stuff feel less gross. And we see something similar happening in the film. First, the mythology around Mei's family lineage is represented in art throughout the temple, which shows her brave ancestor who took on the whole panda bit to protect her family. This turns the potentially aggressive and frightening animality of the panda into a story about courage and bravery. And of course, the panda can only be truly purified from Mei's person via a ritual that takes place during a red moon. Kristeva says that the various means of purifying the abject make up the history of religions and end up with that catharsis par excellence called art. And in Mei's case, it's very clear that much of her family's own mythology and religious practice served this very purpose, to purify the dangerous animal and make it part of a larger narrative. But to be clear, for Kristeva, this purifying is not necessarily a good thing. Rather, it's a process by which we avoid directly confronting the horrifying and upsetting aspects of our own humanity. She sees art and religion as attempting to wallpaper over the breakdowns associated with the abject. But back to our ritual. Mei gets sort of teleported up to an ancestral realm where she's led to separate herself from her panda. But right at the crucial moment where she is about to be purified of this seemingly abject thing once and for all, she remerges with it, comes back to Earth embodying her panda, and joyfully flies over Toronto's rooftops on her way to the Four Town concert. And yes, just like Mei's mom, we can't stop wondering why it's called Four Town if there are 5 of them. Is one of them meant to be the town, right? Like, how does it work? At this moment, rather than continue to repress the panda, she embraces it as one aspect of her complex self. In this way, she is accepting the split nature of her own subjectivity or personhood, or pandahood, rather than seeking some unifying sense of self. It's accepting rather than purifying this abject thing.
The point isn't to push the bad stuff away, it's to make room for it. Live with it.
This is great for Mei. Not so great for her mother, Ming, who nearly loses her damn mind, releases her own truly terrifying panda, and goes on a legit rampage. The size of Ming's panda seems like a kind of metaphor for what happens when strong feelings are repressed for decades and the toxic effect this can have on the psyche. And it's hinted at throughout the film that Ming has a less than healthy relationship with her own mother.
Ming, it's your mother.
I'm not here.
A relationship that seems to be marked by the type of depression and melancholia that Kristeva associates with female children's inability to fully separate from their mothers. And speaking of Mei's grandmother, eventually, all the women in her family unleash their own pandas, showing that when they use their passion for a purpose, it's not all bad. After Ming, Grandma, and the aunties all return their pandas back to the ancestral realm, Mei reaffirms her commitment to accepting her panda and keeping it as an unrepressed part of her identity.
I'm changing, Mom. I'm finally figuring out who I am.
She knows that in doing so, she will be severing her bond with her mother, one that Ming has tried to maintain throughout the film. In embracing the panda, it's as if Mei is acknowledging the fundamental separation between her mother and herself, an acknowledgement that's crucial to growing up. And it's not a stretch to say that this theme in particular is pretty autobiographical for writer and director Domi Shi, who in an interview recounts the emotional words of her mother, the sentence she heard upon each visit home after moving out. "Oh, Domi, I wish I could put you back in my stomach so I knew exactly where you were at all times." But instead, Mei is out of Ming's womb and finally partying at the all-age karaoke spot.
Ready to get your karaoke on?
Totally!
By its end, the film seems to be a sort of warning against the shame and subsequent repression experienced by young people who are coming of age, along with an endorsement of embracing and affirming some of the more abject aspects of their identities. In doing so, Turning Red challenges us to embrace all the weird and embarrassing aspects of ourselves, even the really gross stuff. But what do you guys think? Is Turning Red going to help a lot of young folks accept their desires rather than repressing them? Can we accept our animality and cope with the fact that our bodies make weird fluids sometimes? Or should we just shut up and get good grades because that's our only hope? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and be sure to check out our revamped Patreon page. There's lots of cool stuff there. We think you'll love it. Obliterate that subscribe button like it's a naughty boy band leading your daughter into sin, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.